Hey everyone, welcome to another G News podcast. Today we are fortunate to be joined by campaigner, activist and organiser Kassie Hartendorp, the director of Action Station, for a conversation about her background and the magnificent work on the Treaty Principles Bill, as well as the broader fight to honour Te Treaty and constitutional transformation in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Hey Kassie, welcome to the show.
Kia ora, Gerard. It's awesome to be here, and kia ora to everyone watching.
You're welcome. Hey, let's start with your background and your whakapapa. Could you tell us a little bit about your different lines of lineage and also your political whakapapa that's shaped you over the years in order for you to become such a prominent organizer and campaigner?
Kia ora. So well, there's a few strands to go into, first of all. I whakapapa on my mother's side to Ngāti Raukawa and Ngāti Tūwharetoa. I'm most connected to my Ngāti Raukawa side, and I live in Ngāti Raukawa territory. And from there my hapua Ngāti Koroki and Ngāti Pariraukawa. And then on my father's side, I come from England, Ireland, Scotland, and Italy as well. And then when I was a baby, I was adopted out of my birth family into a Dutch British family, and so that's where I get my Dutch last name, Hartendorp, and was raised by my Hartendorp whānau. So there's a few different threads there that make me who I am. Yeah.
I read about you experiencing a sense of injustice and talking about what it was like to feel like, you identify as Indigenous in the country where the structures are dominated by the colonizer, and how important ended up being having the training you got as a campaigner. Plus, at some stage, you arrived at a Te Ao Māori view and set of values in preference to other ideologies you might have encountered along the way. Can you just talk a bit about that background in your life, in your earlier life?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question about where to start, but I think that, as I mentioned before, so my birth mother is Māori, and I was raised in a family where that was not biologically my own, and part of the reasons why I landed there were due to colonization, were due to my mum's experiences as Māori, which led to me being removed from her as a baby. And I grew up with two other sisters who were my foster sisters, and so we had a very mixed bag family growing up. We weren't connected by blood, but we were connected by love. That was often what we were told. But it meant that we had this very disjunctured, disjointed experience of family life. We had to navigate having different sets of family who were in really difficult situations, and and how we navigate that as children and how we navigate that as adults. So for me, I am one of those people who think that my life has always been influenced by colonization. It's been influenced by disconnection. It's been influenced by injustice, and that's my baseline experience. And what that meant is, I don't know whether or not it was that or something else, but it certainly left me with a clear sense of what is right or wrong. It left me with a clear sense of sometimes you are placed in conditions not of your choosing, and you are a child, and you don't have a choice about how things are going to go. And that was the story of my family, and that was the story of the people that I knew. And I think what that told me from a young age was that um, we have the haves, we have the have-nots, and we also have really good people who try their hardest to be able to have a good life. And because of the structures that we're in, we've not allowed it. So I watched my adoptive parents, who are incredible people, work so hard to provide an amazing life for me and my sisters work really hard all the time on the grind, and yet often struggle to be able to get ahead. And I thought, what kind of world is it where good people do the right thing and create loving homes, sometimes of not even their own children, and yet they aren't really given given a step ahead. And so from a young age it taught me that the world isn't just, the world isn't fair, but there are good people who are doing what they can within that world. And it also meant that I had like a fairly strong sense of anti-authoritarianism along the way too. Don't ask me how that pans out, but I was a teen punk and who grew up in Wanganui at a time when it wasn't that cool to be a teen punk. So you kind of you had your own experience in that way, and I was takatapui, or I was queer, and you know was in same-sex relationships and loved other women, and so you have this experience of a sense of not belonging in many different kinds of ways. And then you think to yourself, well, it can't just be me. There must be something about this world that is causing me to feel this way. And that led me to question the world around us. It led me to question our structures. It led me to question everything. And that led me on a path. I went to university. And when I was at university, at that time we got told that was the golden ticket, right? If you went and got a degree, you're going to get a job, you're going to have a better life than your parents. Those were the days then. So I went down that path, and it didn't give me the golden ticket, that's for sure. The golden ticket was expired by that point. But what it did do is that it gave me a framework and some tools and languages to understand about what was going on in the world around me. And so I could start to make sense of my life and my upbringing and my family's life and the world around me. And that really brought into sharp focus capitalism and colonization as structures that we are existing in. And instead of just blaming ourselves and feeling like we're having these very lonely or difficult experiences, when you start talking to others and learning more about the world, you realize that other people are experiencing similar things. And maybe this is a world not of our choosing, not of our dreaming, not of our imagining, but we're living in someone else's imagination, and we're just trying to give the best go of it. So that led me to get involved with all kinds of different activists. I arrived in Wellington to go to university at a time when the Urewera raids had just happened. And so there had been, under Helen Clark's government, there had been mass raids of activists, of Māori within the Ureweras at that time, and also activists within Wellington. And so I entered into I guess, a community that had had the force of the state come down on them really hard and try to destroy them. And that was an interesting time to be there. People were people were upset, people were grieving, people were angry, people were paranoid because police had literally paid informants to be their friends for 10 years to find out information among peace activists and Māori activists and take them back to the police. So I entered into a time where there were no illusions about the power of the state. There were no illusions about the power of the police. There were no illusions about what was going on politically. And that led me to learn more about our economy and our those kinds of structures. And then along the way, and I can talk about this a bit more, but along that way, I also had an experience of finding the courage to reconnect with my birth family, who I was not connected with, and that led me down the path of exploring Te Ao Māori and my role within it as an adoptee who had been forcibly removed from that culture and from that family. So I feel like that's it in a nutshell. Happy to answer any more
Wow.
questions.
Yeah. One of the things that I've read that you've talked about before is selfish individualism versus a collective way of seeing things, and the kotahitanga that we could actually have. Could you tell us a little bit from that background how you see these different ways of looking at things clashing in New Zealand?
Well, one of the things that I learned quite early on was that when the original British who came here with the purpose of colonizing, because I don't believe that every British subject, so to speak, came here with the intent of colonizing. I think different people, different groups had different interests. But for those who were here with the express interest to be able to expand the British Empire and to be able to uh, set up a little Britain away from home that maybe was better than the Britain that they had created for themselves.
Yeah.
Um, when I learned about that, I learned that a lot of those early colonists were talking about uh, the the communalism and the collectivism of Maori as being a threat to this new regime. And so, in my mind, it has always been this very stark difference. And as I've gone on my own journey with Te Ao Māori and experiencing two very different cultures, uh, I've really, I've really noticed about how over time the neoliberal capitalism requires people to be highly individualized, to feel on our own, to feel isolated, to feel powerless, because that makes it easier for us to be sold stuff. That makes it easier for our land title holdings, collective land title holdings, to be taken from us. It makes it easier um, to keep our wages low, to keep us separate and disorganized rather than together and powerful and a force. So, from my experience, it has always been that the imagining that I would like to see for the world and that Te Ao Māori, I think, offers is a kotahitanga of living together, to being together, to sharing together in in a way that brings us all along and isn't always reducing us to a smaller and smaller and smaller family unit. So we might have gone from these big family units within Britain to now we got the 2.1 child to now even less. All we do is spend time on our phones together. We might never even, be a part of a
Mm.
community. And I think that robs us of of a good life, and it also makes us easier to exploit, makes us easier to uh, control. And so I think a lot about individualism, the individualism of our times, and how we must be trying to always move towards that greater collective of us because that makes us happier, it gives us better lives, and it also makes us stronger and more powerful.
That's great. You've also talked about educating ourselves and what the Te Treaty really says versus the principles of the treaty. And you've talked about how, while the treaty principles are a watering down of the text, one of the effects of it is that they've forced the Crown to engage in a conversation with Maori. And really, we're seeing a whole lot of fear, I think, and uncertainty and wrong-headedness in that kind of individualism that from the far right and the centre of politics. And you've said we could sort out a lot of this if we were all a bit better educated and simply talked along the way about all the problems that we encounter. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So it's interesting because the treaty principles were not something that I knew heaps about before the Treaty Principles Bill, and I think lots of people were the same as well. And once I started learning more, it turned out that the treaty principles had, yes, they were a watering down, they were a way of, at least what I was told, of bridging Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which has always been about absolute tino rangatiratanga and Māori being able to determine our own lives, bridging that with the needs of the state to be able to um, do what they want to do and manage and work towards their aspirations. And so the principles, as I was taught, were this kind of janky, almost awkward way to be able to bridge those two things, because it's awkward and it's janky because at the end of the day the question was always right about sovereignty and who has that. And if you read He Whakaputanga, the Declaration of Independence, as Moana Jackson would always encourage us to do, he would say that there's no way you can read what our Ngāpuhi Tuakana said um, in the Declaration of Independence, which was absolutely a statement of full authority, and then believe that just a few years later, Māori would just say, "Here, have all power and control of our entire country." That's unthinkable. And so the principles are a way, arguably, to bridge the impossibility of the crown at that time ceding their full power and control to Māori, which was agreed to in Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and finding ways to act in the spirit of these principles that could be negotiated through law and through the courts and so on. And and but what I didn't realize was how often those principles were actually serving as a roadblock to governments doing essentially whatever they wanted. So there's an excellent spin-off article, and if you were to search for that in Treaty Principles, um, and I can't remember who wrote it, but I can let you know. And they talked about how when it came to the law, there were many times when the government was overreaching, try to sell off state assets, try to sell off land for railroads, for energy, for water, even the airwaves. And the treaty principles were the last roadblock that would get in the way of a public asset that was there for everyone, for all people in Aotearoa, um, to stop the government simply doing what they wanted at that time. So, yeah, I would say that even as Māori, we are always learning. We are always learning about our history. And I strongly believe that for most people who do a really solid Te Tiriti education workshop or session, it's very hard to come away from that and believe that colonization didn't exist, or that it wasn't bad, or wasn't horrific, or that it doesn't last and touch us today. So I would say that education has been really essential to us as a nation, both as Māori, as Pākehā, and beyond, to learn about what actually happened then. Let's dive behind the kind of political spin and talk about what happened back then. What was going on? What do we need to know about it so we can make sense of what we need to know today?
Great. Let's talk about the Treaty Principles Bill, and let's go all the way back to the start to what was happening over in Australia, and then maybe a bit about David Seymour and him possibly underestimating things here in New Zealand, how Luxon signed up to that when it wasn't even a bottom line, and all that equality bullshit basically that we were put through. While I think he was trying to just scrub out everything that was distinct, about Maori's identity with fictional rubbish. And he failed to even consult Maori along the way with this, let alone everything else. So if you could just tell us a bit about that story and all the people involved, activations, the tohu you guys designed, the submissions, the petition, the hekoi. So the floor is yours. If you'd like to tell us that story.
I feel like we need a few days to really go there. But what I will say is, yeah, going back to the history, when the coalition agreement, was finalised, the ink was being dried. From our team, we had been talking to people from Australia who had just been through the Voice referendum, which many of your viewers probably would have heard of. And so that was where Aboriginal people or First Nations people were attempting to be able to have a referendum that would work for them. They called on a referendum because they have a positive history of referendums. They've done it before, to be able to enshrine a voice in their constitution. And what ended up happening is that the support for Indigenous people having a voice started off fairly high at the beginning of the discussion. So it was around maybe about 60 to 70% of people supported, First Nations people having more of a say in the in how the country was run, essentially. But what ended up eventuating is a year-long campaign where the far right and all kinds of nefarious actors got involved and drove that number down. So what started as around the 60s and 70s of public support for Indigenous people having a voice ended up going into the late 30s, early 40s. So a huge, massive drop over a year. And what that told us is that you cannot be complacent that just because we've fought so hard as Indigenous people and we've made countless gains in all kinds of ways. My auntie Annie Makairi talks about how we were on the brink of cultural extinction. It's probably unimaginable to some of my elders who are living at least within the past around a century to imagine that so many people would be speaking Te Reo Māori, would be going back to our marae, that would be truly blossoming as Māori as a people. And so in Australia, due to active campaigning, that public support was pushed down, and that led to their referendum losing, and that led to basically scorched earth policy on anything to do with Aboriginal rights. And so we watched that and we thought, okay, looks like David Seymour's going to try the same thing here. And so once the ink was dried, we put together a plan and a strategy to be able to fight the Treaty Principles Bill. And for us, you have to remember that at that time, in October 2023, there was no given. The media outlets weren't saying, oh, it's a given, it's definitely going to go through. Together, everyone made that a given. That it was not an inevitable pathway that bill would be dropped. It was completely up in the air because, as you will know from the coalition agreement, it could go either way. So what ended up happening is we learnt from our tuakana over in Australia. We found out from them what would have helped them in a time like that, and then we just basically got to work. The thing about the Treaty Principles Bill is it's not necessary. There's been so many political attacks on Māori, so many political attacks on Māori, and they're still coming. They're still coming. The point of campaigning against the Treaty Principles Bill was to not allow a minority far-right party to claim that the public was on their side. David Seymour can put out as many press releases as he likes, and he does, but we did not want to get to a state where 70% of Aotearoa agreed with him. Because if that was the case, and that could have easily been the case, then that has repercussions not just in this political cycle, but in the next, I would say, 3 to 4 political cycles. I would say in Australia at the moment, any kind of federal policy around Aboriginal people is just off the table because the message has been sent loud and clear that the public do not stand with Aboriginal people, and it's not politically expedient to do so as any government. So we wanted to avoid that situation. So over a year and a half, we worked with a huge number of people, a huge number of communities, people who would probably be listening to this. It was truly a collective effort. There were things that we did along the way to be able to shape the narrative, to be able to make it dead in the water before it was even announced. But at the end of the day, it was truly a collective effort. The I guess the things are the way that we see it with a campaign is there's different tactics. So we think to ourselves, this is where we want to get. We want this bill to be dropped. And then we think, what do we need to do along the way to be able to get there? What conditions need to be in place in order to be able to have that outcome? And so, yeah, there were lots of different things. There was submission parties, the hikoi. We didn't fully organise the hikoi. That was toi tu te tiriti, but 100% we were right there with them, talking about how to make that happen. And my role with the hikoi, at least, was to support mana whenua in Te Whanganui-a-Tara or Te Upoko o Te Ika, Wellington, to be able to host the motu. So one of the things that happened with the hikoi is, I think it's safe to say that it was hard it was hard to get people to want to organize it because we all knew how much work it would be. It was like, oh gosh, like we knew that this would take over your entire life. And we also knew that Toitu had done some amazing activations that were day long, but a lot of people were asking for more notice. So we got about 8 weeks notice for that hikoi, and that meant that iwi and hapu, that people were all informed, were able to be a part of it, and it was really well organised. And what we did down in Wellington is we thought, whoa, we're going to have to host all of those people on the day. We knew it was going to be massive. And so I worked with some dear friends from Te Atiawa and Taranaki Whānui to establish a group called Te Tiriti Action Group, Poneke or TAG, and we built a structure within 6 weeks, maybe less, that managed to sustain 400 plus volunteers, trained up the volunteers to be able to support mana whenua, to be able to manaki and look after the tens of thousands of people that we thought we were going to expect on the day. And I was mostly too busy running around, but from what I hear from other people, it's certainly what I noticed too, is that the the feeling was very powerful. And I had one friend, Helen Potter, say it was like walking into the future. And and that's amazing. And then I think I'll just add another thing on there as well. One of the tactics, again, there's so many things that were happening. There were so many things that led to where it got to. But one of those things was the petition, and that was led by some incredible young people from Rotorua, from Ngāti Whakaue. And so someone called Maringi James put forward a petition on our petition platform. So on an action station, anyone can start a petition on something they care about, and we support them to make that happen. And these rangatahi from Rotorua put together a petition. And it kind of sat there for a little while. It sat there for a little while because we were real busy doing all kinds of stuff. And then I think it was 2 weeks out from the hikoi delivery, and I thought, oh yikes, we probably should get this petition out there. I think there's a few people who would want to sign it. And then we just went hard, and I think it's now sitting at 297,000. So it was the biggest petition we've ever had. The next biggest was against the TPPA, if people remember the TPPA, and it was led by these rangatahi. And I would say that the reason why that petition really flew was because rangatahi, especially on social media, saw it and understood the assignment, and we know exactly what we need to do. So that was handed over at the hikoi, which helped. And yeah, and I guess what I would just say as well was that none of that came about by accident. There was a trajectory that we could have been on, a path where David Seymour completely dominated the public narrative, completely won people over to his spin. And that's not the path we went on, because we all decided that wasn't going to be the path we went on. So I hear some people say now, oh, it was always going to happen, it was always going to die. It wasn't. Luxon flip-flop for over a year, but together we made that a reality. Yeah.
Yeah, man. That was congratulations, by the way. The tohu that you created and designed is stuck to the back of the G News mobile that I drive around with proudly every day. I always feel good when I look at it. Can you tell us a little bit about that design and how that got out there?
Yeah, so one of the some of the advice that we received from our tuakana over in Australia is they said that uh, the far right is going to try and claim that Indigenous people are dividing the nation. That's what they did over there. They said all kinds of things, that Indigenous people are the ones who are causing the problem and dividing our beautiful land. So they said, be in unity, be in as much unity as possible from the beginning. And so we thought, how about we find a way to visualize that unity? And so we created this tohu, and shout out to Extended Whānau and Tyrone and Kay and Max because they designed it. And we wanted to create something that everybody felt like they could embrace, because what we had heard from Pākehā is that they love the Tino Rangatiratanga flag or the United Tribes flag, but they feel a bit awkward carrying it. It's kind of like, is this my flag to hold? Is this my tohu? And so what we wanted to do was create something that people didn't have that feeling. They were like, oh, better not, don't want to be disrespectful to Māori and claim their stuff.
Mm,
So we
yeah.
created something that hopefully everyone could see themselves in, and but we did not expect it to be that popular. And I was driving around uh, the bays down on in Wellington on the weekend, and the amount of bumper stickers I saw just everywhere. And so we did not for a second think it would be that popular. But what we've heard is it really tapped into something for people, and captured a moment perhaps. So the tohu has really travelled, and we love it. It's been magical for us. We have had children's colouring competitions with it. We've had people make their own art, make their own coat of arms. There's always somebody showing us this beautiful creation of what they've done with it, and we love that because we wanted the tohu to belong to the people. We didn't want to be the gatekeepers. We didn't want to be telling people what to do with it. We just wanted to give it and let people run with it and see what happened, and they've been running ever since.
Oh, that's amazing. Um, Now, the hikoi itself, the way that I hear people talk about it is an immense feeling of joy and togetherness. Everyone wants to to feel that way all the time, actually, and it is like walking into the future that we could have. I think that's a really wise way of looking at the potential there. Now, there was a tikanga of a peace. There was no incidents at all. Could you talk a little bit how that manifested? And I think there was one only, wasn't there? And it wasn't
The counter
from,
protester.
yeah, it was from a counter protester. Can you talk about a little bit about how that all happened?
So, for people who don't know, the the local iwi of Wellington descend from Parihaka. And so they have this strong history of peace and of peaceful action. And around the time of the parliamentary protests, actually, in response to COVID mandates, and a lot of the violence that was happening there, the iwi decided to put down a tikanga which was about peace and to bring back the essence of Parihaka for that moment. And that was called Te Kahu o Te Raukura, or the cloak of peace, and the Raukura are the feathers which symbolize the peace. So ever since that happened, I've been organizing in Wellington for a long time, but ever since that happened, it, it was very clear that if we were to protest in Wellington, and we often do because that's where the people we want to protest happen to be, we had to do that out of respect for the local iwi, because they are the ones that have to, I guess, this is their forever place, that 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 whenua, that land, that water, uh, they have been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they will be there for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so they have this long-term vision and a bigger picture of what it means to look after people. And for them, looking after people is maintaining peace. And so whatever we've done since then as organisers, we always respect that call for peace. But it was something different about the hikoi, because we knew that tensions were going to be running high, because Māori have every reason to be very upset, very angry, very triggered, very full of grief about what is going on. And we knew, I've been organising protests for over 15 years. I mean, I consider myself a spring chicken, but you do learn a few things in that time. And protests are very unwieldy. You don't know what energies that people are bringing, and you don't know how it will work collectively. And so we turned to the local iwi, and the local iwi were saying, as soon as the hikoi reaches these borders, then te kahu o te raukura comes into practice. And so all of our volunteers were trained on that. We were all taught about keeping the peace and to look and ultimately to Manaki people to look after them. We thought it's going to be a hot day. People are going to lose their kids. It's people won't know where to get a kai. They're going to be standing for hours in a march. How do we look after people to keep them safe and therefore they can maintain their peace because they're not stressed out and so on. So it was truly, I think, the wisdom and the guidance of the local iwi there that kept us on track. And that meant, yes, we didn't have any arrests. I think there was one counter protester who caused some problems. But out of, and I would say there must have been at least 100,000 people. There were no problems. The energy, the Māori of it was exactly that. It was joyful. People were looking after each other. We had people giving out food, cups of tea, water, sunscreen. I'm not saying it was perfect by any means because it's hard work when you've overtaken a city with so many people. But I think that the leadership of the iwi was in place, and to me that told me about what can we learn, what is possible when we trust and listen to the people who have known a place and been connected to a place for a really long time. What is the wisdom that we can gain from that? And that's what we saw on the day.
Yeah, we did. Well, we saw a haka in Parliament in response to this Treaty Principles Bill, and at that time, that went all around the world. But we've also seen a recent suspension of Te Pāti Māori in Parliament. And earlier we talked about a system that is dominated by the colonizer. What do you make of that whole episode that we've just witnessed recently? And do you think anything good will come of it in the end?
Oh, it's 100% the government punishing the natives, in my opinion. There's no way around it, and it isn't the haka of Hana Rāwhiti Clark, and I think that most people would probably agree that it was powerful. Even if you didn't understand it, I spoke to people from different countries, and they all knew who she was, and they loved it. I was talking to people from the USA, from Australia, from many different places, and they were just said, I don't know what she was saying, but I felt it, and it still inspires me to this day. And I think it's unarguable that haka was powerful. It didn't interrupt the vote. The votes were still said as they needed to be said. Um, it was finding a technicality to be able to punish the natives and put us back in our place. And I think the real reason is to demoralize Māori, to demoralize the Māori who are standing up for Māori the most, which especially in Parliament, I would say Te Pāti Māori is doing that. It was punishing the Māori who are standing up the most, and to demoralize them, to demoralize their supporters, or to make them so angry that they lash out. Because as soon as Māori lash out, as we know, it's very politically convenient to people in the far right. Because then they say, look at these savages and these thugs. They've been there all along. We can't possibly trust them to govern themselves, let alone a country. Let's just put them back in their place. And I think this is a really essential thing to talk about, because a lot of the early conversations around those when European empires were expanding, the whole idea was that Indigenous people were seen as less human than Europeans, and were primitive and not able to lead ourselves or govern ourselves because we were so uncivilized. The fact that Judith Collins even said the word uncivilized, which is a very triggering word, I think, for Māori, because that is the story that we've been told about ourselves for centuries. And it is the story that has justified our oppression, that we are not smart enough, savvy enough, technological enough, enterprising enough, whatever, put the word there, to be able to govern ourselves. And therefore, we need a state, we need a government to always make the decisions for us. So by bullying those people in Te Pāti Māori, who I believe acted on behalf of those hundreds of thousands of people who disagreed with the Treaty Principles Bill in that haka, by punishing them, I believe they're also trying to provoke responses from Māori to be able to prove to them how unfit for governing we really are. That's how I feel about it.
Good. Weaponizing democracy to try and stop tino rangatiratanga. We see that all over the place, and with this government in particular. But one area that we're seeing it now is Maori wards, and making councils hold referenda at their own cost. And this is the National Party doing this. Can you comment generally, I suppose, on weaponizing of democracy and how it's actually often being used in very bad faith?
Absolutely. Well, democracy is always decided by the people who have the most power, what democracy is and how it's going to look like, right? So it's I think it has always been weaponized. It has always been weaponized against Indigenous people, against marginalized populations, because the people who tend to be in power and utilize democracy are the ones who are going to decide what happens with it. So I don't think that is a new thing that is going on. But what is happening is that right now, this current far right takeover of our current government, is how I describe it, is knows that what they're doing is deeply unpopular. So they have to find ways to talk about it that sound really reasonable. And what's more reasonable than one man, one vote, or everyone's equal under the law, all of these things. So even within the Treaty Principles debate, there was no point where Seymour could really come out and say, look, yes, I think that Māori should have less rights because that's going to pave the way for business to be able to make more profits. Even he knows that outright saying that isn't going to win him voters. So what does win is saying, let's just strengthen democracy. Let's just make it sound nice. Let's put a veneer of niceness. And you'll see that with this government all of the time and what they do. The problem that exists with it is it's gaslighting, it's confusing. For many of us who have fought for real equality, for movements who have fought for women's rights, civil rights, LGBTIQ rights, right? These are struggles for real equality in the face of oppression and inequity. It is a bit of a mind bleep to then be told the other side that is trying to re-oppress people is acting in the name of equality. And what that does is it disorients people. It confuses people. And suddenly you're on slippery sand. Like, what is the real oppression? What is the real inequality? And it leads to, I think, disarming people on the right side of history for making the right choice. The other thing that I would say about this is that democracy really is a concept defined by people who make it what they want to make it. And you can see that because, one, property owners get to vote in more than one place. So the one man, one vote rule doesn't matter when it comes to people who own multiple properties in different council areas. So, there's inconsistencies. Secondly, what we don't talk about when it comes to democracy is, why aren't our multinational corporations democratic? How have we gotten to the fact that supermarket executives can decide on the price of butter and there's no democratic conversation about whether or not we agree with that? Where is the democracy in an energy crisis that is about to put us under the pump coming into winter? Where is the democracy when we look at skyrocketing costs in every essence of our lives, when we look at hospitals failing and being privatized by stealth before our very eyes? Where is the democracy in that? Because suddenly it's not about all of us. It's really about a few people at the top maintaining their wealth, their power at the expense of people they know won't vote for it if they're honest about it, so they have to find all these wily ways to convince us to keep them in that position.
Brilliant. Constitutional transformation appears to sit behind a lot of the surface battles that we're seeing, and we've seen multiple, like you mentioned before, a multiple set of attacks on Maori, and you've listed them all before online with different people. So there's a war on Maori happening with this government, and they're literally trying to get Te Treaty out of the way. Can you talk about this right-wing libertarian neoliberal backlash that we're seeing here, and whether you think, I'm going to say, we will prevail with our resilience and get a more Te Treaty-centred constitution in the long run?
Oh, I absolutely think that we will get a more Te Tiriti centre constitution in the long run because, as I mentioned, when you have waged a war on a people that have come back from that brink of cultural extinction and are stronger and more vibrant than ever, you can't put us back in that box. And that's why they know, for example, with the Regulatory Standards Bill, because David Seymour couldn't do it out in the open and win over the public to turn again. That's what he wanted to do. What he wanted to do was turn everyday Pākehā against Māori so that they would vote in a referendum against Māori having what was guaranteed to us in Te Tiriti o Waitangi. That was the intention. He could not get the public on his side because of the strength of Te Ao Māori and because of the strength of who we are as Aotearoa and as a nation. Lots of just everyday people who have never been to a protest and never been to a marae, which is this sounds ridiculous. This is wild. Why would we do this? So he couldn't win on that front, and so he's going through the side door. And the side door is having this innocuous seeming legislation, which really gives him and his lackeys the power to be able to gatekeep any law that comes through, according to his principles and his way of seeing the world. So in all of that, we we are watching how they have to throw everything at us in order to keep us down. And that's because we are strong, because we are resilient, because we have come this far. And I think that we're going to keep going on because, I often think to myself that for those of us who are really blessed to spend time with Te Ao Māori, and I say blessed because not all of us have been connected to it and not all of us, have found a way back. And that's why I talk about my adoption, because there's lots of people like me out there who are disconnected from Te Ao Māori. But for those of us who have, you know, we have a Matariki event at my marae every year these days, and it is the most beautiful, incredible, joyful, loving event possible. It is, the feeling of singing together, the feeling of gathering at 4:30 in the morning, whatever, and looking at the stars and watching the steam rise from your offerings to the new year. It's just, it's just beautiful. It brings us together. It brings us joy. And so, what I'm saying is that there's lots of people who don't get to see Te Ao Māori and how flourishing we are. They're not invited to the marae, they're not there at the events. They just don't see it. And so what I think happened is that David Seymour watched what happened in Australia, thought he could do the exact same thing here, but because he is not party to the everyday strength and joy of Te Ao Māori, he didn't know what he was starting a fight with. And it's not just us, it's our children. I'm learning my native language while I'm raising a 2-year-old. And I have a whole new appreciation for every Māori who has learned how to parent and speak their native language that was colonized out of them at the same time. Māori are a force to be reckoned with, and more than ever, we're not alone. We don't stand alone anymore because we have blended families, we have relationships, we recognize each other, we see each other, and I think that the far right has underestimated our connection, our relationship, our path to a future where we can. This is what it's all about, Gerard. Where we can live together peacefully, where we literally can have the things that we need, the kai on our table, the time to spend with our loved ones, just like little things. Butter, butter. We love butter. We need that butter. So just little things That's what we're looking for, to live together peacefully. And what this, far right takeover is doing is trying to get in the way of that. And it's not to say it won't be easy, and it's not to say we should be complacent, because it's actually going to get a lot more intense in the local body elections and in the general election, because the government now knows how strong the opposition is to them. So they are going to be throwing every dollar, everything they have at convincing the New Zealand public not to vote for the left. That's what's going to happen. And we have to be really prepared that the heat is going to get very turned up, and that we have to be prepared for what's going to come as well, and not be complacent about anything.
Action Station. Can you explain what it is, what it's all about, campaigns that you're fighting for now, and you can talk a little bit about maybe how those work at Action Station so that everyone understands the role of Action Station.
Sure. Action Station is a people-powered organization. So what we do, we're a small team that tries to bring together people who care about the same issues, so we can be as stronger together as possible. Because we can't do any of this on our own. We can't change the economy on our own. We can't change, colonization on our own. We have to do it together. So in some ways, Action Station is a vessel. It is a vehicle for people to be able to jump on. If the car can seat 600,000 people, so we're talking a massive car, massive Congo line, and it's saying jump on so that we can be stronger together on this kaupapa or on this issue, and we might be able to just tip the scale so that we can change the path of history together, because it's always been people who have created history and changed history, so it's going to be people who change us out of the situation now. The active issues that we're focusing on right now is we're calling for free dental care. We want dental care to be folded into the public health system. It doesn't make any sense why our bodies are cared for within the public health system, but they're missing our teeth. And we've allowed, people to make a lot of money off our teeth and our health system. And so we really care about free universal dental. We really care about public housing, or state housing. So right now we're seeing this mass attack on state housing that has been the lifeblood of people who are struggling to be able to have a warm, dry roof over their head. And it's being culled as we speak. So we are big advocates for housing that looks after everyone. It doesn't matter how much you have in your bank account, you have a place to call home. And we're also working on honouring Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So you will see us amp up on Māori wards over the next little while. We've got 29 council areas out of 42 who have active community groups who are going to be campaigning for Māori wards. And a lot of this is really about holding the line on the attacks towards Te Ao Māori, and to be able to turn some of those lemons into lemonade. So basically being like, you're going to come for us, you're going to come for Māori wards. Well, what happens when we love our Māori wards so much, when we love Te Tiriti o Waitangi so much, that we become, just like the hikoi, a powerful force of joy and aroha that reminds us of the country that we can have. So we're all about, at the moment, with this government turning the lemons into some lemonade. Sounds cheesy, but we think that's the task: is hold the line, don't give up, because this government won't be around forever, and that's our job, to make it that way.
Great. Finally, the Regulatory Standards Bill, you alluded to it a bit earlier. And these libertarian neoliberal think tanks, I guess we call them the Atlas Network, and everything we're seeing kind of playing out connected to them. Could you talk about the context behind the sort of corporate takeover and legal straitjacket that we're sort of in, and what we need to keep on doing to neutralize that outside influence on our own ability to determine our own future?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that we're talking about these foreign influences, because what it's really doing is it's telling us about how networked the far right and the right wing is. All right. So it's not surprising that there are these groups that are working towards their own interests. The concern is that politicians often aren't being transparent about it. And I think it was in, you know, recently in Mihingarangi Forbes piece on the Atlas Network where they talked about part of the aim of the far right was to have this whole ecosystem that enabled them to be able to drive governments and policies. And what we're doing now is we're living in the result of a far right that has gotten organized, used their rich mates and their rich donors to create this ecosystem that is now pumping out and being able to influence our policies in government. So what I would say about all of this is our concern is the the breadth of these networks. And one of the real problems here is they're couching anti people, anti planet, anti worker, anti community, anti indigenous. Like what they are trying to do is concentrate more wealth and power in their hands and their mates who are shareholders to continue making massive profits off our whenua, off our people. And the reality is that we need to be able to mount a challenge that is powerful enough to get in their way. Because what they're fighting for is deeply unpopular. Most people want a peaceful world. Most people want a world where they can have a roof over their head and they can go to a hospital and get their child to be seen, you know. But the pathway of networks like Atlas is to privatize everything, is to remove the role of the government, to make business bigger, to make government smaller. And when we say government smaller, for a lot of Māori, we're probably like, yeah, great, let's make the government smaller kind of thing. Like, you know. But what that really means in practice is that the public services that are there to look after us, that are our safety net a lot of the time when we fall, they don't want there. So we have to be able to mount a challenge that is bigger than that and is more powerful than that. And we might not have the money. We definitely don't have the money. But we are able to call out what when we see it, you know, and Gerard, you do this really beautifully. You are naming what is going on. You name the spin for what it is. You puncture through all these silly things about equality and all of that. We need to be so clear-minded to puncture through that, ask what it's really about. Is this in the interest of all people? Is this in the interest of our planet, of Papatuanaku? If not, we don't want a bar of it. And in many ways, I think we need to be building our own ecosystems. We need to build our own ecosystems that are based on the whenua, that are based on the awa, that are based on community, that are based on aroha and care for each other no matter our background and where we come from. If we create those deep ecosystems, that's going to go a long way to be able to challenge the ecosystem that they've built.
Kassie, I want to thank you very much on behalf of the audience today for your inspiring and powerful words and all your work that you've been so successful in really over the last couple of years and longer. So all power to you from all of us here. Keep it up. We'll keep it up too. And I think we can all make this change together. So thank you very much for joining us. And we'd like to have you back again at some point in this battle because we've got a long way to go, like you mentioned before. We're coming up to some pretty heated times. So let's all do this together.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here. And for anyone watching, just keep remembering it is people who have created this, it's people who will change it. We have the power to do that. We just have to remind ourselves of that often every day. So kia ora tātou, keep doing what you're doing and hope to see you again soon.
Welcome to G News, the good news.
Yeah, right.